Now, if you're someone who considers themselves to be a light consumer of politics but isn't fully engaged, then a lot of the terms and language used can be off-putting. The term neoliberalism is often used in the current political discourse. You may have heard it multiple times, but don't really know what it is. So, what is neoliberalism? The main pillars of neoliberalism are privatization, austerity, cutting taxes for the rich, and deregulation. The main proponent of neoliberalism was American economist Milton Friedman, who believed that this would create a trickle-down effect, that by allowing the rich to become ever more rich, the wealth would simply trickle down to the bottom. However, in order to really understand neoliberalism, we need some historical context. The term neoliberalism should not be misconstrued with liberalism. For many, the term liberalism is synonymous with progressivism. This has been adopted in modern US politics: liberals versus conservatives, left-wing versus right-wing. However, this isn't the definition of liberalism, nor is it a moral argument. Liberalism means freedom. The ideas of liberalism, at least in theory, has been adopted by most modern societies, meaning the freedom to express your identity, sexuality, and embracing religious and cultural diversity. Liberalism can also be applied to economic ideas. Popularised in the late 18th century by Adam Smith, a Scottish economist who wrote the book A Wealth of Nations. The ideas behind the book, and economic liberalism more generally, was to abolish the state from economic affairs, therefore removing tariffs and regulations, and free trade becoming one of the core principles in a nation's development. The belief was that growth, development, and equality would be born out of this economic system. The market would self-regulate, meaning the best services and products would win out due to the competitiveness of the system. Liberal economists also believed that this would vastly improve the welfare of citizens and lead to the end of poverty. In reality, the theories behind economic liberalism didn't come to fruition. Rather, it created a highly volatile system. This led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. It was at this point that economic liberalism was challenged and eventually lost out to Keynesian economics. Coined after the economist John Maynard Keynes, his approach to the economy was a far more interventionist approach by the government. His belief that the government stepping in would be the saviour of capitalism. He was right. After World War II, the policies of Keynes was adopted. Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency was the architect of the New Deal. These policies included higher taxes on the wealthy, regulations, and social security. That was largely mirrored over here too, with the Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee, who adopted much of the same, using the state to build houses and a welfare state. But most famously, his government created the NHS. This led to an economic boom, inequality dropped, and people's living standards massively improved. However, Keynesian economics came to an end in the early 1970s. With the elections of Pinochet in Chile, Ronald Reagan in the US, and Margaret Thatcher here in the UK, these politicians brought back economic liberalism. However, it was not the same. There were fundamental differences with economic liberalism and what was being pushed by those governments. Where economic liberalism sought to weaken the states, this new version of liberalism, or neoliberalism as we now know it, looked to the state as an enforcer of the system. An example of this would be the North Dakota Access Pipeline. This pipeline, siphoning oil throughout the US, has been met with protests from local people, particularly indigenous communities, who see the pipeline as a serious threat to the region's water, people, and way of life. In a so-called free market liberal society, the government would step back, leaving the two parties to their own dispute. However, instead, the state sent in their over-militarized police to break these protests. This is an example of how neoliberalism uses the state to protect corporate profits. Where economic liberalism wanted the government to have no role, neoliberalism looked to use the state as its own political force. Many neoliberals today will talk about the problems of big government, yet are supporters of this bastardization of economic liberalism. This is how policies such as privatization, austerity, anti-trade unionism, and the military has been justified to protect capital. In addition, neoliberalism has also been adopted by so-called centre-left progressive parties, shifting the political census to the right, meaning we have been left with no economic alternative. What's more, the system is not stable. The 2008 banking crash came as no surprise to many as the free market policies once again proved unviable, just as they did during the Great Depression. The difference today compared to 90 years ago is that we haven't changed course. We haven't reimagined the economy and are doomed to make the same mistakes over and over again.